relationship of anti-Semitism right now to American politics is, to a great extent, muted. I mean, with Trump, you had the Charlottesville rally. We shall not be, they shall not replace us kind of stuff. And you have right-wing groups that are anti-Semitic, but the Trump people certainly, you have to stretch things to make a charge that Trump himself and his administration was anti-Semitic. Again, the people that he relied on, his Treasury Secretary, Gary Cohn, his whatever, daughter, son-in-law. So I don't think it is a major component at this time of either populism, left-wing or right-wing politics. I think the issue of immigration and race is much, much more important and at the forefront. With Father Coughlin, even if I remember this correctly, he becomes a raging anti-Semite sometime in the middle 30s. It's not right at the beginning, and there's a similarity there with a populist politician named Watson from Georgia, who was a leading populist and socialist in the early 1890s, who advocated a unity between blacks and whites in the South, which is unheard of. And the populists basically got destroyed, by the old term that George Wallace used, out-niggered, where they just were being accused of being the black party, and the Democrats destroyed them. And Watson, in response, just flips over and becomes a raging racist himself. And I think, again, with the Coughlin history, I think the same thing. I mean, Roosevelt becomes enormously popular, overshadows all his competitors, and Coughlin takes the dark road and becomes a raving anti-Semite. I don't know. I don't see anything like that on the horizon in American politics right now. I think that there's other targets for the right-wing populists.
Well, one of the quotes that you leave us with in your book, towards the very end of your new book, which I'm enjoying, is that that it's sort of, the question is, I think you wonder, what does this mean for our democracy? And this populist experience, the nationalist experience, we haven't even gotten into authoritarianism, which is a part of this as well. And you sort of suggest, that these things are going to have, or could have, may very well have their effect on democracy. I dare say, I don't know if everyone on this call agrees with me, but I know I'm just speaking for myself. I myself have been shaken by the battering that the Constitution and that the democratic processes that seem to me to be beyond being challenged seem to have been, the way people describe it is, there are guardrails, to protect the Constitution from being trammeled completely. But if there are guardrails, I think we could all agree that those guardrails have been mangled and banged around. They may still be up, but they certainly have been, at least in my opinion, struck. And so maybe you want to talk a little bit about that and how you see these trends affecting our democracy. Is there a future for democracy? I've heard some of the people on both sides, again, as you pointed out, on the right and on the left, arguing there's no democracy isn't working in America, for all these reasons, the economic unfairness, the loss of control that we feel, no one's listening to us. Democracy isn't working. We'd be better off with an authoritarian.
Well, I found the last year pretty scary myself. The attempts at voter suppression, obviously the biggest one was in the South in the 1890s, eliminating the black vote, Jim Crow. And then we've had a period, if you go over that, of great improvement, climaxed in the Civil Rights Acts in the 1960s. But in the last 20 years or so, as you see again, the beginnings of popular majorities for Democrats, if you look at the presidential elections, what's it, 7 of the last 8 elections, the popular majority has been for the Democrats, not the Republicans. They haven't won all those because in 2 of the elections, the Electoral College went a different way. And we have these problems in our Constitution where it doesn't necessarily reflect what the popular vote is. So there have been these efforts at voter suppression, but nothing compared to what Trump and his people tried to do during the last year. And, and it's pretty scary. What you saw, though, on the other hand, was a kind of to use the old term from the 30s, a popular front between moderate Republicans, neoconservatives, Bill Kristol, people like that, and Democrats against this stuff. And it reached in, thank God, into the judiciary, into the Supreme Court, into the, courts within the states, and they resisted it. So let's hope we've seen the last of it, and that this kind of stuff will be eclipsed. I think it was partly inflamed too, not just by Trump, but by the combination of the pandemic and the recession. If you go back in American history and look at what happened in 1918, 1919, that was when we had influenza. Things got pretty crazy again. That's when the Ku Klux Klan rose up after being pretty quiescent during the years. Enormous waves of strikes, the Red Scare. There were all kinds of crazy things happening. United States, we had the demonstrations against police violence, which degenerated into riots and looting. Crazy stuff in Seattle and Portland. So we've had a really nutty year. And I'm hoping that when the vaccine comes, is when we reach herd immunity and the economy bounce back, a lot of this craziness will subside. And I think that's a lot of what Biden is trying to do. I mean, he's trying to make politics boring again. But on the other hand, you have a lot of these attempts in a lot of states to suppress the vote and make it harder to vote. So we're in a difficult time.
I think I'll say one thing, and then Jackie, if we do have some questions, we can start with them. If we do, I think the only thing I'd add to this, I'm not in no way am I contradicting. I'm just adding. I think that we have had a particularly upsetting time as a Jewish community in America. I think some might say, well, Trump is not an anti-Semite, but I think we have plenty of evidence that there's been a rise in anti-Semitic rhetoric, and that the kinds of events that we've witnessed, the murders of people inside of a synagogue, which has not happened quite to the degree that we saw in Pittsburgh and in Poway, and many other examples, swastikas, and the actual, we can actually with metrics gauge this increase. There's good reason for the Jewish community to be on edge and to be disturbed. What I'm just leaving this group with one point, and that is our predecessors. And I don't have time today to go into it in chapter and verse, but our predecessors also experienced similar periods of terror and upset. This just an example. It's true that nobody was killed worshiping in a synagogue until Pittsburgh. but it is not true that Jews have not been shot at while they prayed. That happened in 1960 in Gadsden, Alabama, and it scared the community greatly. You can go back. John was talking about Watson. Well, Watson was one of the primary figures who cranked up the Atlanta community against Leo Frank with his newspaper. And I don't need to tell, most of you are fully aware of how the Leo Frank lynching and the whole case distressed the American Jewish community and in some respects permanently frightened the Southern Jewish community, permanently, at least by that I mean for many decades. So we have had these moments, and our response has been, I can only speak historically, our response has been not to cower, but to stand on our rights as citizens and to assert ourselves and to fight back. That's been our Jewish response. Jackie, why don't we take some questions?
Well, thanks to the both of you for, I think, a really, like I said, relevant and interesting dialogue about these dynamics that are playing out really in real time today. There are a couple of sort of themes to the question, so I'm going to sort of group them. The first has to do with the idea that, the centrality of anti-Semitism, or let's even say the place of anti-Semitism within populism in terms of the targeting of minority communities. So, John, I think you had mentioned that there are far sort of more high-profile or prioritized targets of populist fervor today than the Jewish community, including immigrants and people of color. Can you share a little bit more? We know there to be a link between anti-Semitism and the way it animates, particularly in white nationalism and in white supremacy, some of these forms of bigotry in other minority communities. So inherently, I think that the questions are inherently, is there an element of anti-Semitism that's sort of under the surface? It's not explicit, but the implication is, the reason we have these problems, right? These other evils is because of the elusive behind the scenes Jew that is causing this. Is that something we see in today's socialist agenda or sort of, populist mindset, populist and nationalist mindset?
Well, again, it's something that some of the fringe alt-right groups and the people associated with shootings in Pittsburgh and the Charlottesville do think there is this continuing strain of protocols of Zion style anti-Semitism that's that's remained in the United States and in the West. I mean, you even saw some of it in the Labor Party, and I'm not supposed to talk about the U.S., but about outside the U.S., but let me just say, with Corbyn's Labor Party, and they're trying to uproot it, part of it, I think, is legitimate criticism of Israel, but you start getting into the Rothschilds when you hear that about the Rothschilds and international bankers. That's a sign that trouble is afoot. And the big deal that's made about George Soros, again, I think there's an element of anti-Semitism there. So yes, but not a major theme in American politics right now. Much more minor and subdued. And I don't see circumstances in which it would become major.
Dr. Zola, I'm curious your thoughts about that. Any other context you'd want to add?
I guess I don't want anybody to say I'm a man of little faith. So I have to say that generally I agree with what was just said, but the question is just because we have a history does not necessarily predict the future. And, we managed to get through 200 plus years of American history without organized governmental pogroms, without seeing massive marches with neo-Nazis shouting, Jews will not replace us, without seeing people gunned down in their synagogues. And we've seen all of that in the last 4 years. So because of what I said about the past doesn't necessarily dictate the future. The other thing that I think it's important to point out is that the debate we're talking about, in a sense, and I really don't, I don't think that John and I are at all debating the essential things, but the argument about anti-Semitism in America, whether it really is significant or whether it's always been insignificant, is an ongoing historiographical battle. Going back to the white cappers that I mentioned a few minutes ago, I could show you articles of people say, yes, you can show me 3 or 4 incidents, but in comparison to what they did to the blacks, Jews were really relatively insignificant. When you look at the broad picture of what happened in the 1930s in America, and how that's often been, the 30s has often been, before our day, has been viewed as the high watermark for anti-Semitism in America. People argue historically, well, yes, but in the biggest picture, it wasn't that significant. And I think when a case could be made that yes, there's a rise, but in the bigger picture, the bigotry towards the Jew, is certainly in comparison to the groups that John rightfully mentioned, the immigrants, blacks, others, other peoples of color, we are not in that same number. And this is a debate. I'm not answering that. I don't have the answer. And but it's a debate that's not just today. It's one that we have discussed historically. One of the famous scholars, I'll end with this, is John Higham, real great Americanist. He's not Jewish, but was one of the first to really explore anti-Semitism in America. And he basically said that the whole with anti-Semitism in America is all about xenophobia. That when people are afraid of the other, that's when it rises with the Jew. And so, well, I could show you a list of articles that challenge Mr. Higham's ideas and theories. So this is where we're at. We're trying to figure what is going on. Maybe another question, Jackie.
Yes. So I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more, and I'm trying again to do the best I can to group in themes. But there's a lot of really good questions, and what I can do is sort of send them along afterwards and see if we can't get maybe some of them answered and sent back. But one has to do with today's progressive movement, identity politics, intersectionality, and the way that sort of populist fervor has been able to find a home there. Could you speak a little bit more to that, John? I'm wondering, do you see that as a modern populist movement, sort of today's progressive movement, and some of the factions, particularly within the progressive movement?
Yes and no. It's if you look at the Sanders campaign in 2015 and 16, he really assiduously avoided trying to make sexual, racial, other kinds of divisions prominent above the class and economic issues. What's happening now, to some extent, not really, again, not in Washington, not in the Biden administration, but in college towns, large metropolitan areas, dominated by college graduates, is a attempt really to define American politics and history in terms of a battle over white supremacy and racism, and I think it really distorts our history. I think it is one factor, but it is not the single dominating factor. So I don't know if that's a that's a helpful way to answer the question. I mean, if you want to elaborate a little what people want to say, but I worry about. I worry about you could call it the cultural left's emphasis on white supremacy being as divisive on our side as its counterpart on the Trump, right wing side, which also want to divide Americans according to race. So I think we have to look at that common ground and try to find things that unify us rather than divide us.